All right, Joel Gausten here from joelgausten.com. This video to come is yet another addition to the New Jersey punk slash hardcore side of things for this channel. For this conversation, we're going to do something a little different. We've put together another group chat, which we rarely do on this channel, but it's always nice when I can get multiple people on at a time. For this chat, I'm really excited to welcome various members of the New Jersey band P.E.D. Kind of going clockwise in my direction, we have Sam, Chris, Pete, and joining us via audio, Toby. Four members of the band. There are a couple of others who couldn't make it for logistical reasons, and a couple people who've passed on. So I'm sure we'll get into that and much more. But without further ado, gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Let me just say that, for the viewers' benefit, this was coordinated via a group email chain that went on for a few weeks. And we just say that if this conversation is anything like that email chain, we're gonna have a very interesting hour or so on this channel because that was something else. It definitely gave me an impression of what could happen here. But first of all, very happy to see you all. Um, let's kind of start off maybe a bit prior to the band's formation, and people should be aware the band is generally something that kicked off in the mid 80s, correct? So we're looking at a time frame of like the mid 80s and a few years forward. But let's kind of go, individually starting with Sam, as far as how you all kind of A, got into music, and B, found yourselves in this, what we'll call the New Brunswick scene of that era.
Yeah, sure. I've always I grew up in Michigan originally, and I didn't move to New Jersey till I was 12. So, but living in Detroit, there's just so much music everywhere, like tons of radio. So, growing up, I just was constantly on the radio and listening to the radio, and my I think what really did it when I was a little kid, my grandfather somehow or other got a huge box of 45s from that were taken from a jukebox machine and just gave them to me. It's like the only thing he ever gave me, my mom's dad. And it was just filled with Motown and Beatles and like everything that was popular in the late 60s, early 70s. So that just made me a fan for life. And then my parents were really young when they had me. My mom was about 18, 19. So they were going to college. So we kept moving around to different towns where one of my parents were going to college. So growing up in college towns, there was always tons of used record stores around. So even as a little kid, I nobody was really watching me too closely. I would just wander off and go to used record stores from the time I was in elementary school on. So I've just always been a hardcore music fan. You know, it's big deal for in my family. Um, and I gravitated towards punk rock. You know, I guess the thing that kind of the gateway was Quadrophenia by the Who.
Hmm.
You know, where it was, here's a story that kind of mirrors what's going on inside of you at the same time. And I really was very powerful to me. And that after discovering the Who, Quadrophenia, when I was about 13 or so, it just, and being listening to college radio, I was all in. So that's kind of how I got into punk rock. And then I lived in we Highland Park, where all of us are from, uh, is a 5 minute walk into New Brunswick, Rutgers. And at the time I was growing up, I'm a little older than these guys. Um, there were so many incredible shows going on at Rutgers, like concerts. And my parents, again, didn't really give a shit. It were as far, if I'd be like, oh, I'm just going over to New Brunswick to Rutgers, and they'd be like, okay, sure. So, from 13 on, I was going to shows at Rutgers, and just seeing an incredible amount of bands, and then I quickly figured out how to make my own tickets. So, just the I was always into punk rock larceny as well. So it was a good fit. So, and I met these guys. We're all knew each other from high school.
Excellent. So, Chris and Pete, you kind of hit the ground running pretty early on as well, as far as getting into what was happening in New Brunswick at that time.
Pretty much, I suppose.
I mean, as an aside, 43 or 44 years later, I can firmly look back and say that Pete is responsible for my entire career in music. Um, we met, my first meeting with him was actually at a mutual friend's house, Dave Rock. And Pete thought I'm pretty sure thought I was somebody else and was like, hey, you play bass. And I was like, I don't play bass, but I'll certainly be willing to sit here and try to play. And I had eventually, can't remember why, but eventually transitioned into learning how to play drums because I also didn't know how to play drums and ruined everybody's life for a number of years because I'm left-handed, which interfered with everybody's very carefully cultivated sense of order because I have to turn everything around to learn how to play drums.
Hmm.
But that's where I started. So it's all fucking Pete's fault, pardon my French. And I give him credit for an interesting life. So
You're welcome. Your mother has also blamed me for your
yeah,
music career.
yeah, it's a several infamous, very infamous conversations with her in quiet moments over the years. She's an absolutely lovely woman, but at about 30 years in, she pulled me aside. She said, "So this isn't a phase," and I was like, "No." As it turned out, it was not a phase. Um, it's taken me some pretty cool places, so
Hmm.
I have no regrets about it.
And Pete, how about you? What kind of drew you into what ultimately became your participation in P.E.D.?
Uh, Sam and I started talking, God, when I was in eighth grade, and he was a senior in high school, and we were in a band for a couple months uh, called The Attack. I have recordings. It's very scary. And it was kind of pre P.E.D. in a way where we just took some sort of riff from a song and just played it for a good long while, longer than it should have been played. And we never actually would get to the chorus, but that's how we write songs, I guess. But yes, after that, I mean, um, between knowing Sam and knowing Chris and Toby and some other folks from our high school who were also musically or punk rock musically inclined, we all kind of happened upon the same focal point, and you know, our bands kind of just joined forces and became P.E.D.
Hmm.
I suppose.
I got to say, I'm a little older than these guys by about 4 or 5 years. And the problem I had was in my grade, when I was in high school, there was nobody else really into hardcore and punk, to the extent that I was. And I had huge problems with the kids who are like a year older, who are really into like new wave type stuff, and they were not cool. They were just such assholes, and go at it all the time. So I kind of like had to find my I had to find my own team from the cull from the younger grades. So I had somebody to talk to. And Pete, the best story about Pete, like when he was in high school and we were started hanging out, he like all of a sudden showed me a letter that he got from I think it was Colin Moulding from XTC, like a really long, intricate letter where he's going into all these technical details about equipment he was using. And I was just like, wow, this guy is incredible, you know. So Pete's always had very unique and interesting insights into stuff, doing music.
And Toby, I don't want to forget about you, although we can't see you. You're here. Um,
Hello.
so how about you? How did you sort of find your way into not only New Brunswick, but the assortment of characters we're joined by at the moment?
It came in like two or three concrete stages. Like basically, stage one, I had parents that had a great taste in music and a ton of vinyl in the closet, like rows and rows and rows. And so I was exposed to a lot of the same things Sam was talking about with the Who and the Kinks and even King Crimson and the Mothers and Zappa and blah blah blah, like all kinds of stuff. So I had a really great foundation. And my dad was a big fan of Uncle Floyd, and we would watch it together. And there were some little like inklings and hints of this punk that was coming through on that TV that I was like, certainly Shrapnel had their a couple other bands. Before AOD, this way before I even knew AOD or any of the North Jersey bands existed. I was like, what's that? Um, but then it kicked into another gear by happenstance, really. Um, I was sleeping over my friend Robin and Wheeler Mormon's house for the weekend in Highland Park, and all these other guys know who these two are. They're my friends. We're all friends, and they were brothers. And the mother decided to send all of us to their father, and they were divorced or never got married or whatever. And he was going to take us over for the weekend. He lived in the East Village. So in 1981, in May, I got out of school and went and got my stuff together to go for a weekend with Robin and Wheeler. And we took a train to Manhattan, and his dad picked us up. And we didn't know what we were going to do, but he did. He said, we're going to see the Mets. They're playing the Dodgers, and there's this new pitcher, Fernando Valenzuela. We want to check him out. So we took a train to New York, jumped on the, whatever ACE to get to Grand Central and jump on the 7 to go out to Shea Stadium. And we saw the Mets, and we saw Fernando Valenzuela, and the Mets lost. And we were coming back into town, and we got out in the 20s. He lived in the East Village, so we got out in the 22nd Street or somewhere, and we're walking down the street. And all of a sudden, his father stops, and he says, wait here. So me and Robin and Wheeler are waiting on the sidewalk. He went down an alley, and a couple minutes later, he comes back and he waves us down the alley. And so we're like, all right, whatever. So we go down the alley, and there is a door with a light over it and some dude with a laminate on his neck. And he opens the door and ushers us in. So we follow Robin's father in and Wheeler's father in to this place that is dark. It was straight out of the basement from Spinal Tap. Like, what the hell are we doing? I had no idea. I'm like not even 12 years old. And so we meander through the darkness and all of a sudden a curtain opens, and we go out onto a balcony, and Motorhead is playing at the whatchamacallit, why am I spacing the name? It was Fast Eddie's last show ever. And I walked in and just saw Motorhead for an hour and a half. My ears rang the next day. The father had to go to work the next day. And so we were left to our own devices. So me, Robin, and Wheeler are walking around the East Village, and we stumble upon Tompkins Square Park, where the band shell still had electricity.
Mm.
You can plug in and play. And so we saw Kraut
Wow.
that were just playing for free the next day. And I saw all these people like running around in an oval with these weird mohawk things that are like 2 feet high and spikes and leather and this and that. And that whole weekend totally changed me. I went home having the inkling of the Uncle Floyd and then putting that together with seeing Motorhead and Kraut within 24 hours. And I'm not even 12 years old. And then I came home, and that's when I started to, I was always friends with Peter. Peter and I were in a band in high school together before all this. And it just all fell into place, because I started getting into the Jam and Gang of Four and the Smiths and just getting into REM. Even earlier REM was incredible. And so that was the third year. So I went from decent parents give me a bass to accidentally seeing Motorhead and Kraut to immediately finding my tribe in Highland Park.
Wow. Wow. Well, if you're going to have an intro, that's the one to have.
That's the way it went down. I mean, I couldn't believe it myself. I still think about that show because it was when the plane had no panels on it, and it's just flying around on the stage, and Filthy Phil's playing. And then there's this guy who's like, his microphone is poised so high that he has to like look almost up to the ceiling to get to it. And I'm like, what the hell is this? And it turns out it was Fast Eddie's last show ever. And I'm still spacing on the place. It's the place that Roseland turned into. No, not Roseland.
Danceteria?
No. It was a big place. Ritz. What was before the Ritz?
Paramount? No,
No.
that was Jersey City? Or no, somewhere up there?
On the tip of my tongue, I
It's
can't.
on the tip of mine as well. We all know it.
Yeah. We all have
But
old.
that's my general origin story.
Yeah, that's a good story.
It was very easy to pick up because I'd learned piano at 7. I had already been in concert choirs and church choirs, so I understood the notion of vocals and harmonies and whatnot. And then when the P.E.D thing started to kick up, I wanted to play bass, and I bought this piece of shit Italian bass, called it Echo, and I dropped it down the stairs, and everyone laughed at me, and I got blisters on my fingers, and but I kept at it, and I eventually got a Rickenbacker 4001, and eventually it just took off from there. It's just like I was in love.
It was the Palladium, by the way.
Yes, thank you, the Palladium.
Yes.
Very cool. So what year was it that P.E.D got off the ground proper, where you were playing shows and actually doing it?
85.
85.
Pete, you'd
Yep. 85.
Yeah, 85.
And for the viewer who's unfamiliar, we should clarify that PED stands for post ejaculation depression. Who came up with the name?
I did when I was in 11th grade and sitting in health class. I wasn't paying close attention at all, And then all of a sudden, the teacher talked about post-ejaculation depression as being this thing. I'm like, holy shit, I understand what that is. And if I ever have a fucking band, I'm gonna name it that. It was like an aha moment. So I'd come up with the name years before there was even a band. The band came from that kind of idea, and that aha thing. So I think that kind of it sums up your life condition, because it's not just like a sexual thing, but everything's kind of like once you do it, it's kind of like, I've done it. So everything's kind of post ejaculation depression, somewhat.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah, I can get that. Which kind of leads me to a question I was thinking of asking you, in that, as you know, I've had the AOD guys on. I've had a couple of the guys from Bedlam on the channel, and this has come up a bit where, obviously for those who know the band's history and the music you guys did, there's always kind of an element of humor to what you were doing, from the band name to a lot of the songs you had. And when you look at 1985 New Jersey versus, say, 1985 New York and the respective scenes, there's definitely a difference in vibe. New Jersey was a lot more tongue-in-cheek. Paul Richard and Bruce Wingate are infinitely more goofy than, say, Vinny Stigma and Roger Moret, who are both amazing guys. All of them are great. Just a different way of kind of viewing the world. What do you think it was about Jersey that kind of lended itself more to that, kind of fun-loving, we're just having fun sort of vibe, versus New York, where everything was so largely serious about, this is the state of the world and we're gonna, you know, we got to stay united because we're falling apart, and life is rough. In Jersey, it was more, we're doing this to goof off. At least that's the impression I get largely.
It's an antigen, really. It's like a counterbalance. I mean, Paul Decolator loved to call New York hardcore people cement heads. He even wrote about it in his Tips and Tours magazine.
He called Doug
And-
Holland Da Holland.
But it was all love. I think New Jersey just had a better sense of humor, and New York was a little more too serious. And then when you get the dark humor, you bring in the knuckle dragging and the this and the that. But I think it's not just AOD and it's not just P.E.D. There were bands that were really funny that were all throughout the state, and I think it was part and parcel of that counterbalance. I think it worked, honestly.
Well, I think New York, when you went to shows in New York, you immediately got picked on and called Bridge and Tunnel. I'm like, what the fuck? How many of you live like in the East Village? Everybody's taking a bridge or a tunnel to get here. And just living in New Jersey is the kind of like the butt end joke of the entire country. So you're kind of like, yeah, I'm from Jersey. Fuck you. And I don't, for whatever reason, all of us are like unrepentant wise asses in our own way. It's just like my entire time in the hardcore scene feels like everybody was trying to outdo each other, doing a joke or a shtick, to like try and crack each other up. It was just like this endless loop of fucking around, and that's from being like, when you're in the joke of the country, like you're like, yeah, okay, we are a joke, but fuck you. I'm gonna be funny too.
Mm.
And that also it also talks about the permutation of the P.E.D. name. Because yes, it was post ejaculation depression, but we also called it party every day, or Pete even does, or yes, it was used.
Positive
But you know what I
energy.
mean? Like we weren't taking it seriously, and I think in a subconscious way we were making fun of all the other three letter acronym bands that were everywhere, you know. And that's I think a little bit why AOD kind of took to us a little bit. Who knows?
Mm.
We actually were AOD for uh when we went on tour in '87. AOD's van broke down, and since Paul Decolator was talking to them, and we decided we were going to take all their Midwest shows since they couldn't make it. So we just showed up at all the venues and said, "Hi, we're like AOD, P.E.D." And we played we played Detroit, Chicago, St. Louis, like as AOD.
Mm.
But yeah, that's us.
And when you did that, you were playing your material still.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, everything was so fucked up, and back then nobody knew anything that was going on. So it's not like people are like, "What was AOD?" They're just like, whatever.
Well,
Yeah,
it's kind of amazing for someone like me who's a generation younger, to grasp this. I had Jack Steeples on last year from AOD, and we talked a lot about this. Those guys toured pretty extensively when they were doing it, and I know PED toured as well. And it kind of blows my mind that these bands from Jersey would do, like, in some cases, these cross-country trips with a payphone and maybe a copy of Maximum Rock and Roll or some sort of way to connect people. Now it's almost ludicrously easy to, like, this being an example, and I can do this with people all over the world, with a couple hits on the keyboard, boom, you're in. But back then, it wasn't like you could just go on the internet and book a tour. And it just seems amazing that so many bands from Jersey did so much in that era where they could go cross country and do all these tours. So for you, what was it like logistically to make that happen? Because I know PED certainly did, play to a fairly large degree when you were in a band.
Insane. First off, like the the whole deal with uh using payphones and basically here's the deal. I'll break it down real simple. There were 20 people in the United States who put on shows,
Mm.
spread out from the East Coast to the West Coast. So all of us traded those names and numbers of the 20 people and would like add on, so all 20 of us would like then be in touch with each other and be like, "Oh yeah, hey, this kid's putting on shows at a VFW hall in Idaho." And then we add him to the list. The guys in DC were really good at that, at keeping track of like who's putting on shows where. So we would just trade names and numbers and like in a notebook. That was basically and I can't emphasize this enough. Like in 1987, we just kind of woke up one day and said, "Okay, it's summer. We're going on tour," with no plan whatsoever, no van, no plan, nothing. And it was totally like insane, yet it worked out. Like a friend of ours loaned us his van to go on tour, which
Very good.
yeah, thank you, Ed Mullen. And
Ed Mullen.
yeah, who I'm still friends with. Really, he's like one of my best friends still.
I just talked to him this morning. He mistook chlamydia for clematis when I took a picture of a flower.
So you guys like that's me because I put on shows as well as being in the band. So I had a notebook with just people's numbers, like, here's the guy from COC. Here's like, Ian Mackay was really great about like sharing information too, which is how we ended up to be like kind of a brother band with Soul Side, because we were just sharing dates and information and stuff. So
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Soulside. I've known Johnny for years. And aesthetically and musically at first, it kind of seems like a mismatch in a way. You wouldn't expect Soulside, because they're, a great band, but and I mean this in the most positive way. kind of bookish, well read, that serious, Johnny's a pretty serious dude. And then you got P.E.D. But it also does make sense because it's like, okay, that's a city thing. Like you're connected to DC, you're gonna hook up with the DC bands. And I always found that from my experience, the DC scene is a lot more laid back, casual, and funny than maybe their reputation would suggest. They're a little bit more grounded than, some of the, oh, these are very serious people who only eat rice, sort of vibe.
I think that it's important to understand, I mean, as history, and if you were to ask each individual person here at some point or another, that being from New Jersey certainly gave everybody an overlay of delightfully humorous cynicism. That was really unlike anywhere else in the world. But also, like if you look around the room, like there are you know two public school teachers here. We're both like both Sam and I are media specialists. Pete's probably one of the more well-read individuals that I've known, and also musically adept. And Toby teaches, has done some teaching as well. Um, that the fact is that at the end, and also again over the years, each one of us has probably been fairly instrumental in developing or maintaining the music scene around us. Sam was and Paul were certainly there long before us, and at a certain point, for me, like I used that as a template to doing shows in New Brunswick for 8 or 9 years, and we put on 400 or 500 shows. And Pete was fairly instrumental in maintaining a scene in Highland Park later down that line. It The commitment to the music and the intelligence, um, at times maybe it's easier to understand New Jersey in that a lot of the people from that era were smart and crazy.
Yeah.
It wasn't just you were crazy; it's that you were smart and crazy. You were aware enough to be like, "Hey, this is real fucked up.
Mm.
My only defense mechanism here is to just make a joke out of it."
Yeah.
So it was very intelligent, very motivated people who were also people who didn't fit in, and they were the weird ones, and we were the weird ones, and it was a joke because the whole thing was a joke.
Right.
So either you got the thing or you didn't, and but it was not. It was all predicated on the idea that everyone was smart.
Yeah.
It was always a shock to meet someone who's not at that point in that thing. Like, it was like oh, this one's, oh. Um, but yeah, that's that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, my own experience, say for example, in the 90s, I spent a lot of time at the Pipeline in Newark.
Absolutely.
Those Thursday nights. And there'd be bands, who, had their songs about drinking and, very sort of basic stuff. But then you talk to the band members. Larry from Nipple Bane is an attorney, or was at that time. Andy from Pleased Youth has a very accomplished career in technology. You're talking to guys who are very switched on, who may have, like people who didn't know that scene would go, oh, these are knuckleheads or, drunken skinheads or whatever. But we sit down and talk to these guys. BT from the Wretched Ones, rest in peace, was a very accomplished engineer, music engineer, guys who really had something happening. And I always found in New Jersey, sometimes the sillier something was, the bigger the brain was behind it, because
Yes.
there was a bit of cynicism. It was more of a reaction to what was happening, which kind of makes me think about somebody who, when some people mention his name, it's automatically the antics, the craziness on stage. And that makes a lot of sense because he is that performer. He intentionally goes in that direction. But from my own experience, having interviewed him a few times, very smart, very switched on, very warm. There's a lot going on in here. And that's David Yao. I wanted to bring up Yao because I know you guys had some experiences with, I believe, both Scratch Acid and Jesus Lizard, right?
Yeah, we we loved Scratch Acid so much that they were going to play New Brunswick, but the show got canceled. And we found out they were playing Connecticut. So we called up the Anthrax and said, look, we'll play this. Can we please play with Scratch Acid? We love them. You don't have to pay us. Just put us on the bill. So that's how we met, hung out, spent the evening hanging out with Scratch Acid. Like nobody showed up at the show, but we were there hanging out with them. So when the Jesus Lizard first, like I think the Jesus Lizard's first show, when they got a drummer and became a band, was in New Brunswick. I showed up like way early. I'm like, hey guys, remember me? I'm a P.E.D. It was, we were hanging out at the Anthrax. They're like, oh yeah. So it just forged this weird friendship with the Jesus Lizard when they first started around, to the point where like we were on first name basis, and they put me on the guest list all the time, and I'd show up at their shows and knew their roadies and Touch and Go Records. This is the most bizarre thing. After like Touch and Go Records for 10 years sent me all their new releases for free to my home. And I never found out why or who was responsible for that. Every time there was a new release, I would just get it in the mail for free, just really bizarre thing. So, Yao and those guys, I heart Yao. Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. What a nice guy. What a nice guy. I did a whole feature on him and cats. He put out an art book where he drew pictures of cats. And I still have the recording on microcassette. Just says David Yao talks about cats. But cool guy, really cool guy. And Mac from the Jesus Lizard, another nice guy. And my dealings with Touch and Go have always been positive as well, And then there's a lot of intersection because Akashic, Johnny Temple from Soulside put out David's books. He did the Jesus Lizard book. So the world's always incredibly small. Which leads to another question, because the P.E.D. album, which I believe was 87, was put out on New Red Archives, which is Nikki Garrett from the Subs. And
First ever release.
yeah, which is amazing. So and I know certainly in the 90s that label had a real gravitas. Um, how did the Nikki connection come to be?
Oh my God. P.E.D. is the most mind-boggling, crazy effing band that there's no way we should have had that record out. It should not have happened. And I was sitting having dinner with my parents one night, and the phone rings, and it's like my parents are like, hey, it's for you. And it was Nikki Garrett. Which was again mind-boggling because I was such a big UK Subs fan. Like I Sleep in My Car was like one of my theme songs, even though I didn't have a car to sleep in. I slept on Dave Rock's couch, but we just loved UK Subs. And here's the guitarist calling me up. Nikki Garrett was at the time the head of the warehouse for Caroline Records. So he saw all the different records coming and going, like that Caroline was distributing. And when we put out the Bulgaria EP, Tim Yohannan gave it like this rave review. And that is worth that sold it out immediately. So Nikki Garrett saw this single flying off the shelf and put it on, and he liked it for some reason and decided that he was going to sign us to be the first band. It was just totally random, crazy shit. I mean, the band was pretty much done by then. We'd done everything we possibly thought we could accomplish. And then all of a sudden we've got a record deal. It was just, and with Nikki, who co-produced the record, and Rick Oakley was the engineer. He's the Kraut relation. Rick Oakley produced all the Kraut records, and Don from Kraut was also working with Rick Oakley in the studio in New York, where we did all the production stuff. So, it's all interrelated people and weird shit. And, it's just, it's crazy. Like I call us, I always think we're like Zelig, you know, that film with Woody Allen where he shows up, like in every historical event, there's a picture of him off to the corner, and that's P.E.D. Like, for some reason, we're just showed up and played with every single band that we loved somehow. And I don't know how. I don't know how we got a record deal. I don't know how any of this shit happened because it was not like we sent a demo to Nikki, like,
Hmm.
just discovered us, which as I became friends with him and learned his personality, I totally get it now. We're both major Wire fans. He's just really into bizarre shit, and we are the most bizarre shit, as human beings that at the time I think you'd find.
Yeah, he definitely seems to be an esoteric sort. I saw him. I went to go see Nick Turner from Hawkwind a few years back. Nick was actually touring as Hawkwind in the US at that
Right.
time. And there's Nicky Garrett on guitar, and I'm like, yeah, it's Nicky Garrett from the Subs. Interesting. So, it's kind of fun to see where people's interests take them. And it's again, going back to my initial point, it's amazing how organic things were at a time when we didn't have all this technology. People tend to think that this is the be all end all, but no, it's always kind of been that way. You just do your thing and things will happen. If you're doing good, interesting stuff, people will kind of find you no matter what you're doing. You don't need all this all the time.
The other crazy part with Nikki, he was friends with Rick Oakley, who was the Kraut producer. Rick and Don from Kraut worked for Saatchi and Saatchi, at the time the world's biggest advertising agency.
Hmm.
They ran the audio studio for Saatchi and Saatchi, um, which was a state of the art 48 track studio. Um, and Nikki was friends with them, and we were able to get in after hours when Saatchi and Saatchi was closed. The record was produced, like, I'd show up at 6 and go upstairs, be taken upstairs by security, and there's Nikki and Rick, hanging out. And Pete came one night, for that too. It was just really crazy shit.
Wasn't that the place that the Hooters did their record?
I have no idea.
Pretty sure I heard that once.
So yeah, probably a lot of bands were recorded at Saatchi and Saatchi, the advertising agency, after hours. This is what we did. Um, we used whatever we had.
True.
Now, when and why did PED eventually wind down? I know there's been some reunions and things, since that point, but when did things kind of, when did the wheels come off or the brakes get hit on the band?
I'll let the other guys take this because I'm kind of curious. I have my own theories, but
Well, let me chime in a little bit. I joined PED in '87, and I believe my
Although
first.
you played at the first show, or technically the second show in
Yeah.
1985,
Oh, that's right. I was hubcapping it
and playing bass.
with Faith No More.
No, 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 not there.
he was
That was
there though. There's photographic proof.
yeah.
Playing
Well,
bass.
either way, I didn't, as a bass player, around '87. John Terry, who I very hardly tried. I mean, I tried hard to get him on this. He didn't want any part of it. Um, he left the band, and we had Peter, Sam, Chris, and Quentin Flory, who's the Hawaiian now, and they needed a bass player. And because I had been in bands with Peter, a couple of them, like two or three. Um, One was pretty decent, and I figured out how to play well enough, and so it just kind of made sense in the Highland Park understanding of us being all together that I give it a shot.
Yeah, that
And
somebody was going to be in P.E.D. from Highland.
right, and so I started playing, and I think the first show as a bass player was, I think it was Middlesex County College, and I think it was with Lifetime, and
Hmm.
no, not Lifetime.
Uniform Choice,
Uh,
maybe.
who?
Uniform Choice or Youth of Today. We were on weird
I
bills too.
know that Thanatos and I know that Hollow Body were playing, I think. Chris, can you help me?
I have vague recollections of Middlesex. The one that I remember was with COC.
That was before me. That was John.
Yeah, that was a life-changing moment for me.
And anyway, to get to your point, Joel, I joined in '87, which is what you're characterizing as the backslide, but it was a water slide. Um, because we really did record that album. I was the one that played bass on the Nicky Garrett LP, and I was the one that went on the '88 tour that was national. And we got to play Gilman Street and a couple other interesting places. The Raunch Records people in Utah were absolutely, it was an incredible experience. And the Detroit show with Scary Carey. Do you know Scary Carey, Joel?
I don't know.
He used to book shows in Detroit at a place called Blondie's. And it was the only place, the first time, and I'm from New Jersey, and we're all from New Jersey. It was the first time I ever saw a cop beating somebody on the road, like just like without provocating. Like just like I'm like, what are we doing here? And it was right by Tiger Stadium, and there was gunshots everywhere and decolators like trying to get laid, at the after party. But it was just nuts. But my point is, that was the post ejaculation depression. It was, it had its weird parts of the tour, but in the end, it was successful in odd ways. And I don't, after that, it kind of disintegrated. I went to college outside of the town. Pete Antonio, who is, Sam mentioned, Jack Terrycloth of World Inferno Friendship Society, um, joined, and that's after me. Um, but I think it went along before that, after that rather, and Peter was in Grey House. There's all kinds of really great bands that nothing stopped. Is my point. It was Sam.
You know what sums it up? At the end of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, Gene Wilder turns to um, Charlie and says, "You know what happened to the kid who got everything he ever wanted in life?" And the punchline is, he lived happily ever after. And like this band started as like a fun joke, and you end up with like a record deal and playing with every band that you love and doing tours, and like you've achieved every goal that you never even set out to have. Like, where do you go from there? And it was supposed to be, we did this for fun because we're just friends. It was never like, oh, we're gonna go do world domination. It was just like, I only really liked playing for our friends in New Brunswick.
Hmm.
That to me was the best time ever. Like when we went on tour, I'm like, oh, I'm at the Core Tavern in Detroit, or I'm at the Core Tavern in Toronto. That was not fun for me. But like playing with our friends and hanging out, like, we'd bring these great bands in from outside, like COC and 7 Seconds and Soulside, and we'd all hang out together, and that was fun. So there was nowhere else to go, and like we'd also been banned from many places, so there was also, unless we were willing to put the shows on, there was nowhere else left to play, and there was nothing else to prove. So we did it all, and that's an amazing thing.
Here's a hot take for you for this from the side. Um, Part of me has always felt that there was a part of us that the bane of our existence was that at the end we got good.
Yeah.
So there are songs that were recorded at the end after the record. We did either one or two. Pete might remember more than me. I know that we did one. We did it at Tracks East. It's 5 songs, one of which appears on that Shredder comp. That was the last. That was the last song that I think that we put out, and it was also there's that, and it was also on that New Red Archive sampler. So we got good. We were good. We were finally like we were in a position where like I had finally learned how to play drums, sort of,
Mm.
and Pete was already good, but we got to a point where like we were good. We could actually hold our own as a band, like a functioning actual. We weren't a tornado that landed on the stage and there was all sorts of chaos, and then we walked off chuckling. We actually became a functioning band, and at that point, it was we had already done all these things, and then Pete and I went off and did separate piece. Sam goes off and he's doing another band. I think that at the end of the day, it should be acknowledged that Sam, from the very beginning, I will say without hesitation, I look to him as he's the guy in this band. He's the guy that he says this, we go do this. Whatever dumb thing is going to happen, if he's instrumental in creating it or if it was Decolator, I'm in. Whatever fucking dumb thing is, that's the thing. That's what we're doing. Like I'm here for the fucking ride. Um, and when it came time at the end, we recorded these songs, and they're good songs. I go back and I go, might be our finest moment as a band playing together. And then Sam got interested in other things, and we went off and we did other things. And there was no like between the guys in the band, at least for me, there was we didn't break up, we didn't argue and fight. I know that there were some interpersonal conflicts that had nothing to do with me, but it wasn't necessarily the guys who were in the band at the time. We're all still friends and we were all still hanging out. We just went and we were doing other things. And the music scene itself had also changed around it. Like at the end of the day, like when we stopped playing, there's a death of humor in New Jersey for a while. If you look at the music from that era, it's very earnest and there's not a lot of humor in it. There was a changing of the guards, of the guard, not with an S, in terms of what was popular and what the overall vibe of New Jersey was. And for a while, it got to be very earnest and very serious, and not anything against it as a non-drinker, but very straight edge and also very like the punk kids and the hardcore kids. There was a changing of the guard. I can give you the moment that I can remember realizing it. There's a show where Youth Today plays at Middlesex with the adolescents, and we go, I'm there and I'm psyched to see the adolescents. And I have seen Youth of Today, but never in a format like this. And Youth of Today plays, and there's 500 kids there, and they are all wearing champion sweaters, and they are going fucking berserk. And it's a wild show, and that is the thing. That is the thing that was happening. There's a whole new generation of kids there, and they get off stage, and the adolescents come up, and they are fantastic. And there are 30 people watching them because the entire crowd has flown out of the room and they are standing outside, and I'm standing there with 30 people who are all people that I recognize, and I'm like, this is the day that punk died in New Jersey. And hardcore became the dominant point, like that, the delineation between the one thing and the other. It was no longer a hardcore punk. It was like, there's the hardcore kids and here's the punk kids, and they just went in different directions. And we straddled that line, for a while after that, but it wasn't much longer.
Mm. Yeah, I
Well,
totally remember that era where even in like the mid 90s, when I was playing a lot of shows. We would do like the pipeline thing where it's all drinking and partying and all that. But then you'd play like those college bills where like the Krishna guys were around. And I have nothing against any of them, especially now I see people from back then. Everybody's cool, everybody has their families and doing their thing. But there was definitely a divide there where I saw that as very, at the time, kind of like stick up the ass, very like, you know, whereas I think my crowd kind of got into it to not have that, to get away from the rules and work and the structure and all the other responsibilities we had. And then these other cats were like all about rules and it was like there was definitely a divide there for a bit. At least that's how it felt for me. Um, and that more power to that scene too. Like they were obviously finding what they needed out of music, and that's what this is all about. You find what you need. You create what you want. You create what you need in life. So they were doing their thing, and that's wonderful. But yeah, I agree. There was definitely a change for a while there. But early on, you mentioned Jack Terrycloth, and I wanted to circle back to him because one of the things I'm attempting to do is a similar conversation like this with Sticks and Stones, the surviving members, because World Inferno is a well-known band and deservedly so. But for us, like the Jersey people, we knew Sticks and Stones. When I was a kid, early high school, Sticks and Stones was one of the biggest bands for my friends and me. We would get those records and, them being a Jersey band, we were totally attached to them. Um, Great stuff, great records that still hold up today. So because as I said before we started recording, it's always nice to mention people who, we've lost to time along the way. What are some things you can tell me about Jack and specifically his time in P.E.D.?
I'll just start because Pete was one of my best friends, to the point where he was living in this house with a bunch of other punky people in when he was in Sticks and Stones in Somerset, New Jersey. And I literally would just go over there and let myself in. And if the door was locked, I'd open up the window and let myself in. Like that's how we would, the guys in Sticks and Stones and Pete and our friends, we would go out to dinner like as a group like 2 or 3 times a week. It was like it was really great. It was fun, which is so um I didn't when we did the PED reunion, the one thing my one thing I wrote down, I didn't want to do it for starters, but I threw in this weird clause where like I didn't think it was ever gonna happen. I said, okay, if you get Pete, you know, Pete V, Jack Terrycloth to do it, then fine. And I'm like, because World Inferno were really huge at the time. And I'm like, there's no way he's gonna do it. But then there's Pete, like all of a sudden magically appears. So um yeah,
You're
Pete,
welcome.
yeah, Pete was a really great friend of mine. And when he died like 4 years ago, even though there's a whole big story with that I'm not going to go into now, but it really crushed me. Just like when Paul Decolator died, I felt it was a transition point in my life where I went, it made me rethink what I'm doing. What am I doing? Because these guys were so instrumental in my life. So that's my relationship to Pete. Like we were just very good friends, and we went out all the time. And what Chris was saying about everybody being smart too, like Pete and Paul and all of us would constantly share books and movies and bands. like we were so engaged with what was going on. And, everybody was always like, hey, I just read this book. Here, take it. Like it was it was great. You'd learn so much. And because there's no internet, everybody would just share their information and their likes and dislikes. And it was really cool. So, and, we were all a big group and all friends with each other. And, Pete was part of that. He was part of the gang. So
Pete Pete was around the Highland Park people from a very early. He dated someone who lived in Highland Park, and that's at like 15. So um, he and I were roommates for a pretty significant amount of times before the house that he's talking about, and we spent a lot of time. He was notorious for being awake at 4 o'clock in the morning. His room was right over our living room, and he would be up at 4 o'clock in the morning, stomping in his boots and playing guitar. It was always an interesting time. Um, he he had always he was from Bridgewater originally, but he always had a very strong connection to our group of friends. Um, for like since his entry into that thing, he's an erotic impulse, and we played with them. They were very serious. Um, and he spent time hanging out with us as a crew because he was dating somebody, and then after that ended, we remained friends. And that's actually the like he got in with the group of people that you're seeing here at like we were all very young. So like it's funny because we're talking about sticks and stones, and I flashed at this moment like he calls me and he's like, "Hey, can you drive this guy who lives in Highland Park up to Bridgewater?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's Brian Johns, and they're starting Sticks and Stones." And I drive him up there,
My
and
favorite singer.
yeah, and then, but at that point, I'm like, I ended up driving him up there like 5 or 6 times until they figured out having a car somewhere in there. And I'm like, dude, I'm not in your band. like, like, uh, get your singer there yourself. You have a car. But no, it's he was a he was an integral part of probably at least to some degree everyone in this room's life. Um, and
her brother, like
Yeah.
all us P.E.D guys, Toby and Chris and Pete, like it doesn't matter. We'll go years without talking to each other, but we're like brothers, still.
It's
Like
true.
always, like I ran into Chris's other real brother last night at a swim meet. Chris's brother, by the way, is in
Manifesto.
yeah, Streetlight Manifesto, which are a much bigger band than any of us probably are in. But we're all we're all tight. All our brothers, sisters, family. Like it's kind of like a cool club.
Yeah. Highland Park's only a square mile, but our tenant, reaching out because we had New Brunswick at our fingertips. And the one great thing before, Google or any kind of digital anything was having access to a serious library. And in Highland Park, this goes to what Chris and Sam were saying about, just I don't know, aware people. Well, a lot of our parents worked at the university. And if they did, that meant you could go into the library, the Alexander Library in New Brunswick, and access anything you want. And so in high school, why would I went to my library in high school. No offense, Sam, in the future. But I also could go to a land grant institution, university level library. So it was always these open things that helped us, I think.
Hmm.
There's another thing that is always worth mentioning, and that is the relative size of the scene of bands and music. Like the early on, you mentioned like the character, whether it be North Jersey or South Jersey or Central Jersey bands. The scene wasn't that big. Like there are pictures from city gardens, of that era. There's 1,000 kids. Yeah, that was everyone. That was it. We were all there. Um, and because of that, like either you knew somebody or you knew somebody who knew somebody, and like the connections were not Kevin Bacon-esque. It wasn't 6 degrees. It was like two.
Mm.
There's a couple thousand people, a couple thousand kids at that point who are involved. It's not like, and especially growing up in an era where rock shows are big, then they're routine and they're 15 or 10,000 people. And, people go out all the time to see live music. This is way more intimate. And the character of the joke, the character of the thing was still like, you put us all in a room. We all know each other. So the whole thing carries, it's easier to pull off an inside joke when everyone is inside, you know. So the things that look bizarre from the outside are the things that look like, oh, that's crazy. It was looked different from the inside.
And there was also a bonding element, Chris. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely.
we're technically in Central Jersey, but a lot of us, when New Jersey's Got It compilation came out on Buy Our Records, that turned me on to. I was like, what? Not only AOD or Pleased Youth, but Stets, My Three Sons,
Mm.
Mental Decay. Like it just was, Bodies in Panic and Bedlam, and then that set me off. That was the fourth gear of my origin story. Is when I found that record. And I had already known who Pleased Youth was because my first local hardcore show was at a place called the Convent,
Hmm.
which was a house on Bishop Street in New Brunswick next to the Women's College that had all these members from a band called Frozen Concentrate.
Mhm.
And so they had shows in the basement. And I'm like, Peter was like, I don't know if he was with me or Chris, but I went to one of those shows where it was Keith Hartel's second show as the singer of Pleased Youth. And it was also a band called Resistance, a very good hardcore band from Edison that just never really recorded anything. But if they featured Donnie Bruno, who was the original bass player for Loose, which is an incredible band that, the Great White Hope that never happened. But it's just everything just falls into place when you have all these disparate kind of experiences, and then you go to like one basement. And by the way, Doug Visdom was at the bottom of the basement, the stairs, collecting money and filling the keg. So I got a cup. That's when I first met Doug Sluggo,
Mm.
was that night. And, we've been, friends ever since, real. But that's how integrated everything was. It wasn't such that it was Highland Park was integrated. All we had to do was seep into New Brunswick because it was all the same flow,
Mm.
you know, and that's what made it special.
Yeah, it's like when the Bouncing Souls, I mean, everybody knows the Bouncing Souls now, but when they first started out, I was friends with Greg's sister, Karen, and she's like, oh, my brother's got a band. So, they just started hanging out in New Brunswick, and then they brought like other bands in. And it was, like the thing kept moving and moving. I'm still dumbfounded that the Bouncing Souls ended up where they are. Like of all the bands that uh, I put out their first record on my record label, and I was thinking Loose was going to be the band that was going to be the arena thing, and never in a million years did I ever envision that to this date in 2025 that the Bouncing Souls would still be around. It's crazy to my head.
Yeah, for us, the Dropkick Murphys were the surprise, because we would play with them at the Pipeline when they were, 4 to 6 months into their life as a band, and they were just a band that happened to be playing a show, you know, and then within 6 months, they were like the biggest thing in the world and have kind of stayed that way for the past 25 years, And it's like, wow, well, first of all, congratulations to you guys, but again, at first glance, they were just a band, one of many that would play the Pipeline on a Thursday night. I think there's even a flyer where the band I was in was maybe even higher on the bill than they were, like it wasn't a big thing. And then boom, it became like the next big thing. So you never really know. And it's kind of cool to see, it's always cool to see people from Jersey do it. You know what I mean? Because the band to success ratio is a little in Jersey, so more power to them. But you mentioned Decolator. We talked about Jack, and someone else from the band has passed on as well. Is that right? From P.E.D.
Uh,
P.D.
who?
From
Nah,
your
just Paul and Pete. Do we?
Yep.
Am I missing a lost member, like who's dead?
Stu's here. John's here. Quentin's here. Matt Thomas, I believe, is here.
Yeah,
Who am I
I'm still in
missing?
touch with Matt Thomas, by the way, who was our original member.
He played the hubcaps, Joel.
Yeah.
Okay.
We just have a moment of love for Stu, who was physically and
Stu Monsta.
unable to get here. I was talking to a friend of mine last night actually about Stu because he worked with Stu and knows and loves Stu. I think it's actually very important to understand Stu had a role and more of a role than anybody might give credit to
Yep.
um, in the evolution of this band, and primarily because he was an Edison heavy metal guy, like, and we were not from Edison, and we were not heavy metal guys. I, like some of our most popular refrains, back and forth in that email. When we met Stu, he was all about Sodom.
Yeah.
And he was all about Slayer.
Voivod and
He,
Witchfinder General, you know.
he
Nice.
his inclusion into the band in that era actually opened up some interesting
Yeah.
things because he had a knowledge from that I was fully unaware of. Like, I grew up in a very music heavy household, but it was not heavy metal. And then went into punk rock, which was also not heavy metal.
Nope.
And the first time that I ever listened to Slayer was with Stu, and I was like, "The fuck is this?" And I was like, "Well, I mean, I'm enjoying this, but we would practice for a time. We practiced at Stu's house, and I this is actually where it came up. Like, Stu was the first person I sat down at his right-handed drum set, and obviously immediately messed it up, and couldn't figure out. I can't fix these bass pedals because he was the first person that I ever knew who owned a right-handed double bass pedal, and I couldn't figure out because it didn't work. So I was like, I don't know how to make this work, and it won't work. But he brought an element of his own bizarre humor into the band, and
Yeah.
Yeah, I love Stu. Stu is
Yeah.
much loved by all of us.
Stu is kind of the joy through line of this entire experience. He was the one that came in and just loved to be there. He just wanted to jam, and I as a bass player, my influences are like Bruce Foxton or Dave Allen, but with Stu, then I got into Geezer Butler, and I understood what Geezer was doing because I already was aping Bruce Foxton, but instead of funk and punk, it was heavy metal. It's the same thing. And so Stu is a great through line, and I wish he were here with us.
Yeah, I mean, shout out to Stu, who I do wish was here because he in many ways he got the thing, and he was an outward presentation. Like, you meet him, and they're like, dude, you are absolutely an '80s Edison metalhead. And then you talk to him, and he is probably one of the most knowledgeable, in-depth musically people that you're ever going to come across. This is a guy who has been like tape trading and just loving music of all different things since then. Like, he was tape trading then, and he's still doing it now. and collecting music and listening to music and really analyzing it. You talk to him, and he's got
He found all the Genocide bootlegs, and Genocide shut it down.
yeah,
Well, Bob Sexton did.
yeah, he's got like an encyclopedia knowledge
You know,
of music. And then he's also wearing a beer ball on his head and writing a song about smoking pot. Um, and it's like, those two things were very simple, very emblematic of New Jersey, as a scene then. It was those things, like smart, but also crazy.
Mhm.
So
Let me kick it up to Peter. Peter's been a little quiet, so I want to drag you back in. Well, let's talk about music after the band. Because, things moved on in different directions. Why don't you tell me a little bit about what you were doing after P.E.D. paused for a bit there?
Well, actually, I mean, during PED, I was the person who probably quit the band more times than was actually in the band, being a despite being a founding member. Um, but I was also, um, if somebody couldn't make a show, there was the occasional, oh, can you do this show with us? Am I playing bass? Am I playing guitar? Whatever, you're playing whatever. Um, and I could actually pull it off because I was still like, if I was not in the band and they like recorded a new demo, Chris would, dub me a cassette of it so I could hear what they were doing or whatever. There was always that sort of thing. Like I was in the band, not in the band,
Mhm.
you know.
Once you're a member, you're always a member.
Right, exactly. Um,
worst job of quitting ever.
um, but I guess that's what helped out a lot with all these like reunion shows that we have done in our tenure, whether whoever was in the lineup, whether it was, Toby or Stu or Pete V or whatever, you know, uh, I could always be kind of counted on to remember how the songs went,
yeah.
which is always a nice thing. But anyway, I just wanted to get that out of the way. Uh, to your initial question, which I've probably forgotten, something about not being in PED, something other music.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, I've been in, and Chris and Toby can attest to this. I've been in like 7,000 bands who, if we would have kept at it for a little longer, probably would have done something potentially great or whatever. A lot of the bands I've been in have we've gotten to the point where we broke up, and years later I would hear, oh man, I saw you guys play in somebody's garage and whatever. I thought you were great. It's always like the 5 or 10 years after the fact
Mm.
for me. But no, I mean, I've been in a bunch of bands. I've been in more bands than I can remember. But whether I've always kind of straddled the line between like really enjoying being in a punk band and really enjoying being in a pop band. Uh, and there's been a lot of pleasant ribbing over the years about that. But it's what I do. I like hooks. So what else can I tell you? Do you want to know bands? I don't know. The most successful ones, Gray House. I was in Gray House. We were really loud. Um, we were, New Jersey's answer to Fugazi or some silliness like that. I've been in the Anderson Council for the past 20 something years. Uh, you know, and I finally achieved my, goal of being on the radio and getting royalties
Mm.
on a monthly basis. So that's cool.
How many
Nobody comes to our shows, but we're on the fucking radio.
how many bands are you in now, right now, Pete?
Currently, I am in the Anderson Council, I am in the Melancholy Kings, and I am in the Make Three.
Tell me about the Melancholy Kings, Peter.
The Melancholy Kings are a band that, well, when the Anderson Council was looking for a new guitar player, I was speaking with my friend Mike Potenza, who Toby and I were in a band in high school with. And he's like, well, I'll join your band. And I'm in a band too. Why don't you join my band? So I am in his band and he is in my band. And we are two totally separate organisms with totally separate songs. Although the Melancholy Kings do occasionally play songs that we wrote in high school. So there's that.
I'll call you later.
Okay. Nice.
How about the rest of you guys? Where did say like the 90s and beyond take you musically?
For me, you want to go? You want to talk, Toby?
Either way, it's we all three probably have the same story. I personally I left. I moved to California in 2001, and I was in Los Angeles for about 10 years. And while I was there, I learned about the film and TV music industry and became a music supervisor and a music publisher and a clearance consultant and all the things you need to learn there. But that was really the opening that gave me the impetus to if I was on a project, I know where the good music is already, you know. And so I did this one film, I don't know, about 20 years ago called Reed Fish. And I wound up putting maybe out of like 13 songs, I would say 8 of them were from New Jersey, including Peter's Anderson Council, the song called Strawberry.
Smell.
What is it?
Strawberry Smell.
Strawberry Smell. So even though I went away, I was in bands in Los Angeles that were really good, especially one that was like late Beatles meets late Kinks. It was the songwriting was just off the charts. But it never went anywhere because we were in a big sea of other people. We played Spaceland a bunch, but that didn't mean shit. You know, blah blah blah. The Silver Lake Lounge. We played with We Are Scientists. We opened for them, and they were great. But it never went anywhere. But I was able to continue with working in the film industry to help get exposure and some money for as many people as I could. And it's been a slog, but I'm still at it actually. I'm 27 years in. When I started my first show at the Court Tavern, I closed off the street and we had, I don't know, 14 bands in 12 hours, from 2 p.m. to 2 a.m. Peter was also involved in that. Mad Daddies are on stage. It's the only time they ever played outside, ever. And that was a fun day. But that started in 98, and I just kind of kept going on in that idea of, well, maybe I can create this way rather than be a member. And I'm still at it. So I'm sticking to that story.
Cool. Cool.
I actually have Pete beat for right now for the moment, unless he missed a band. Because are you still doing Hey Bulldog?
Yeah,
So,
I figured I wouldn't bring up anything but original music.
but that still counts as four. Because,
It's an excellent band, Peter.
Yeah.
but I'm also in four bands right now as well. Um, I there hasn't been a moment in since starting and doing this with the first band that I did with Pete, and then all the way through. As it turns out, just really like playing music, um, and there's not a whole lot of things I really enjoy. Um, I'm not much fun at parties, but I do
True.
really like playing music. So currently, I'm in four bands, three of which are active, one of which is in the sort of beginning stages, and is just a studio project. I have been I'm in a band called Nora, which sounds much like falling down the stairs. It's a fairly aggressive, discordant band, been around for a while. I'm doing a band called Born Tired, which is fast, lifetime or West Coast punk, with actual singing. And I'm doing a project with some guys from around here, that started as a studio project with a guy who I have known for 30 years, who decided at 40 to learn how to play guitar, and then called me and was like, "Hey, I learned how to play guitar and I wrote some songs. Can you help me turn these into like rock songs?" And I have a studio in my house. And I was like, "Sure." And then he turned up, and the songs, as it turns out, are really, really good. That band's called Miracle Worker. We've played a total of one show and released about 15 songs at this point, where he just comes over with an acoustic song, and we don't practice it. We just, whatever comes to mind, we play it, and then we overdub things into it. At this point now, it's fleshed out into a full band. And so, like, the bands that I am invested with, very much like what Pete said, I have a band that rocks. That's Miracle Worker, in this sort of replacement Soul Asylum way. I have a band that falls down the stairs. That's Nora. And then I have a band that soars, and that's the other band that I'm in, Born Tired. It's fast, you know, the melodies and the harmonies in that are very soaring, and the music is very energetic. So sort of soothes each part of the things that I like about music. I'm good at compartmentalizing.
Very cool. Sam, how about you?
Well, I, as these guys mentioned, after PED, I took a totally different direction. I've always been into like all kinds of other different stuff. So I ended up, I decided I wanted to work in film. So I spent a few years trying to break into that thing. But musically, in 1991, there was a Jersey band called the Blisters. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
They asked me to join, and again, the weird PED like vibe happened right when I joined them. They got a record deal to put out a record in Germany.
Mhm.
I did a record with the Blisters called Pissed to Meet Me,
Right.
and which I love. I think that record's great,
Yeah.
It's like the best thing I was ever on. So I was in the Blisters for 5 minutes. Again, I realized my heart as far as doing music just wasn't in it to the point where I should be doing it. And I wanted to do all these other things. Like I wanted to get a college degree, and I wanted to make a movie and work on film. And all during that time, I was a writer as well. So I wrote for a lot of different magazines, and like I was just always doing a million other things. I have really disparate interests. So I don't, and I was really still really into music. Like I would befriend bands, because as a writer, like I became friends with this band from Seattle called Hammerbox.
Mhm.
Um, we became good friends, and I met people like at record labels, and I went on tour with Pegboy. I invited myself on tour with them, which is a story in and of itself that I won't go into. But so, and Jesus Lizard, I was following around, and just doing all kinds of weird stuff,
Mm.
but trying to have a good time, which I hopefully still am, although my family wouldn't agree. But they find me rather dull now, my own personal family, but which I suppose I am. But when you do have done so many crazy shit, like, before, you're kind of like, oh, God, you know. So that I
There,
wanted to posters musically, right?
Sam sends us you're missing the music part where Sam has developed himself his own studio, and which you can clearly see in the background. He has developed his own home studio as well, and sends us interesting snippets and pieces of music, all of which have been declared. We should do this with this, and we all go okay. And one of these days, perhaps we will. It's a he I could say this live and in person so that it can be on record, is that you send stuff and I listen to it and I go, okay, I'm in. There's no that still holds true. You push the button and I'm going to show up.
Yeah,
Like,
I know. That's the problem. I'm a little scared of that, Like I keep threatening to get us all together and record, and it will happen. I
Mm.
just don't know when. Eventually I'll decide, but I have this real fear of success. I think, which is why P.E.D stopped. The moment we stopped functioning as a band was when Nikki like called me up and said, "Do you guys want to go to Europe? And I can get you on the John Peel show."
Mm.
I
And
wanted
I
to go
was
to
just
Europe.
like, I paralyzed me, Same thing with the Blisters. The reason I left the Blisters, um, we did the record for Germany and they got a European tour. And I'm just like, I just, I have a problem with being like, I like being the punk rock underdog. Like to me, that's like where all the heart is. Like when P.E.D, when everybody's like, you guys suck, it made me really like happy and want to work harder and like all that stuff. I like being, you know, the
Ostracism.
perennial underdog. Like, what the hell's Sam gonna do next?
Mm.
Um, and it's great to shock people. Like I think I still got a lot of shocking to do. Like one day I'm just gonna write a book, and I made a movie and I did all this other shit. So um I just want to do like fun, interesting things.
Mm.
So that's my 2 cents.
Fantastic. Well, as we hit the finish line here, anyone have any final words, shout outs, anything we didn't cover before we call it a day?
Wait, I got wait. I couldn't even begin to list the hundreds of people in New Jersey I was friends with and who supported me and were friends with me and who I went to shows with and went to dinner at their house and did all kinds of great stuff with. So it was really fantastic. And also all the bands I got to work with, and I could go on for hours about like this person, that person, just so many people were so great. And the reason we did it and stuck with it was because it was fun and it was family,
Mm.
and that's my final 2 cents.
For me, honestly, I'm still friends with every one of these people, and it's never, no matter where I moved or where whatever, it's not. I never lost contact with Chris, Peter, Sam, Stu. Quentin kind of trailed off, and I still talk to John Terry. Um, we're
I thought
friends. We
Thomas.
grew up together, and that's just the end. No matter what we're doing, we're all still kind of, you know, you know, just still glued together in some odd way that brings us back in what makes what we do fun, but also just being around each other. It's always great. When we did the P.E.D reunion in, I don't know, 2010, none of us practiced a jack shit when we went into Peter Horvath's basement to run through a set list. And Jack Terrycloth was there. And we hadn't played together in a decade, probably, average. And when the shit hit the fan, we were tight as God hell. Like it was just unbelievable how quickly we were able to just lock in. And that Christmas show at the Court Tavern was definitely I think the best P.E.D show I ever played. And I played a lot of them, but that one was special. And the first one at Middlesex County, where I was like, holy shit, I'm in this band. I better jump up and down and not lose my place and blah blah blah. But all in all, we were still in French class together. Some of us, or history. Chris is a couple years older, Sam's 4, but Peter and I were in the same grade. So I've known Peter since, I don't know, 4th grade probably, because he lived a block away from my pre-middle school. So none of that's ever going to change, and that's the beauty of it. And I think that in the whole New Jersey hardcore has that thread everywhere. I still talk to Tommy Kaprowski. Bruce Wingate's a good friend. I visited him in Connecticut more than once. Some of us are gone. Decolator gone, but we still crack jokes and do stuff. It's nothing's changed. We just kind of grown out, but it's the same plant. So that's my 2 cents.
Well, I'm very sorry to hear you're still in touch with Kaprowski. My condolences.
He's a sweetheart.
Of course he is. It wouldn't be an episode of my podcast unless I didn't have a dig at him at some point. So yeah. I think at least 40% of my guests have all come through him. So
Hmm.
he knows I'm only having fun. F you, Tommy. Anyway, Pete, Chris, any parting words?
I've said what I need to be said. I think I'm good.
You said it well, Chris.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Chris took my answer, so
Sorry.
all good.
Well, thank you all so much for taking some time to chat. I know a lot of people from that New Brunswick scene have been watching these videos, so I'm always really happy to add someone else from that era and that scene to this, ongoing narrative I've been putting together. So, thank you all very much. Always nice chatting with people from the times a bit before mine to learn new things. And as things move forward, if anything individually comes up musically with any of you guys, you know where to find me, whether it be through another podcast or I have a website as well where I do writing about music. My door is always open to you all. So, certainly feel free to keep in touch. Anything I can do moving forward, I'm very happy to do. And I guess we'll take it for the next time.
Yeah,
Thanks, man.
Thank you kindly.
Very much.
I really appreciate it.
I think this is like the end cap of P.E.D. Like really nice way to like, close the door. And, and as I say that, all the guys are like, yeah,
We
right.
have new songs to record next
I've
month.
been trying to slam this door for about 20 years, and he
Oh,
just.
God, yeah.
Well, if it's indeed the slam door, I'm honored to have been a part of it. If it's a crack in the door that's going to open a bit further, I'd be very happy to be involved in that as well in some way. So, in any event, my channel, my email, my phone, all of which is open to you all at any time. So,
Thanks,
um,
man.
hope
Thank
this,
you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Joel.
my pleasure. We'll talk again soon.